I want to bring my guest in. I am joined with the man himself, Jeff Rich. Jeff, how you doing today, man? You doing all right?
I'm very well, Jamal. Can I just check my mic volume because I know I
Yes.
came in a bit soft. Is that good?
Let me check. Let me put my volume up to make sure. Okay, say it one more time. Repeat one more time for
Is
me.
is that volume good?
Yes, you sound
Awesome,
fantastic.
fantastic.
Um, I was laughing at. Let me get your take on that before we get into the NATO stuff. And I
Yep.
guess it is related to NATO because he's at the NATO conference. I have a hypothesis, and I
Hmm.
want to bounce that off of you because I want your take on it. You're um, a student of history. Oh, by the way, just so the audience will know who you are, I brought you in and just start talking. Jeff
That's great.
Rich, he's an author, historian, podcaster who worked for 33 years in government, now retired. He currently resides in Melbourne, Australia. Jeff has spent a lifetime studying history and how knowledge of historical currents can help give context to a changing, for some reason I want to say geopolitical consensus, but for a changing world. You can find Jeff on YouTube at The Burning Archive, and you can find him on Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. I will tell the audience The Burning Archive is a fantastic channel.
Thank
It
you,
is a
Jamal.
fantastic channel. I love your historical context. I love the commentary that you do. I'm a sucker for history, so I love it when you go into like these historical things and giving more context on that
Hmm.
stuff, which is kind of what brings you here. When I saw you going to the NATO thing, it's like these myths of NATO that America tells itself. And I was like, yes, we tell us of these myths, right? We won the
Yeah,
Second World War, just
yeah,
American
yeah,
grit.
yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, but before I get into that, I have a hypothesis. I want to bounce off you.
Hmm.
I don't think Trump wanted to get involved in this. I think that Donald Trump probably was told Israel can do it. Iran is weaker
Hmm.
than it seems. Israel can carry the burden, and a short, blunt attack with America's backing it will be enough to do it. You got the son of the Shah coming out as if he was government in exile, just coming out of nowhere, government of exile. You had these decapitation strikes. You had all of these groups internally spring up in order to destroy Iran's capability to respond immediately and destroy their offense, create chaos, havoc, terrorism, etc. And when they talked to Ben Gvir while Tel Aviv was effectively crumbling around him, he said we didn't realize Iran was as strong as it was. And so they thought this could be a short, blunt war putsch attempt. And when they realized they were in an attritional war, they were screwed and they needed to get out of it. Their budget was going through the roof. Apparently, they spent like 20, 30 billion shekels in 12 days, which is just mind blowing. And they were trying to appropriate 60 billion for the rest of the year. They were running out of armaments. Their budget, their fiscal situation was in chaos and free fall. And they go and say, okay, we need to get out of it. And I showed the report from the Jerusalem Post, I believe, where they were like sending messages to Iran, hey, we want to end this. We want to end this. We want to end this. And then you get Trump coming in and bombing the sites at the very end. Theatrical by all measure. And Iran responds in a theatrical fashion for parody. And then the war stops with Iran getting the last word in. I get the sense that Trump didn't really want to get involved, but he was stuck trying to save his client. And
Yeah.
so the last final shot was a warning message. It was meaning it might have been theatrical, but it was a warning. Stop. Stop now. Israel needs to stop. It's gonna go belly up. Give me your take on
Yep.
this.
Well, I think you are right about the theatrics of the final strike. Although you wonder whether Trump has really been, kind of fully briefed on that strike, or whether it really did achieve its aims.
Oh, you think he fully believes it? Because
Well,
he's
it's
been
just
doubling down,
the
tripling
way
down.
he's reacted, like quite, angrily to journalists who question it.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump would not have conceived or devised or developed any of these plans. These were all complex strategic plans that have been prepared for years
Yeah.
and have been executed at this moment. And Trump would have said, "Yeah, let's do it." And his advisors would have sold it to him in a way to get him to do it, I would have thought. And I'm sure part of selling it to uh, to Trump would have been, this will be easy, we're the mighty USA, we're the greatest, all that kind of thing, and we'll do it in a couple of days. The regime will be changed, and you will have your glorious victory that you
Yeah.
want to have. You might even get it for your military parade for your birthday. It's a curious timing, really, wasn't it? And so, but it didn't really quite go to plan, really, did it? I mean, in a way, it did. I mean, it was a pretty sophisticated operation, and the Shah's son, was all primed and ready to go, and had his lines prepared, and we
How
had
weird is that? That is so
I mean,
weird. He just
so
came out the blue.
well, yeah, but he clearly wasn't. He didn't just come out of the blue. He'd been prepared for it. He would have been. He would have, practiced. He
Yes.
would have been
Yeah.
disciplined because he's got a reputation for not being very good at anything. So, I think it was clear. It was clear that the U.S. government wanted this to happen. I don't know if it happened in the way that the US government wanted it to happen. But then again, we've seen that story before with
Yeah.
Russia and Ukraine. I mean, Joe Biden made his big speech where Russia, the ruble will be rubble and Putin's got to go. And, that they really did expect the sanctions from hell would, collapse Russia within days or weeks, or cause internal dissent or whatever within Russia. We saw it with the attacks on Yemen, with the farce about the signal thing. This sort of we're going to smash them, great job, boys, all this kind of stuff. But it didn't actually quite achieve the strategic result. And there was another case I was thinking of, but I just can't quite remember it. So there's this repeated pattern of, I guess, maybe Syria in a way. I mean, they wanted Syria to be changed back in Obama's day, but it took however many painful years for it to actually, for them to actually achieve their objective. So this repeated pattern of the US perhaps overestimating its power, underestimating the resistance of its enemy, and also having a sense of it's the shock and awe tactic from whenever that war was, with shock and awe repeated over and over and over again, that will just send the bombs away and everything will crumble, and they'll all, cheer our names and, throw flowers at our feet and, welcome the new state that America has brought into being. So I feel there was definitely a plan, and there was definitely, if you like, a miscalculation about the nature of the strategy and the resilience and the coordination between the different players. I suspect over the last week or so there's been actually a very active role from Russia and China behind the scenes in diplomacy, and I can say more about that if you like. But
Yeah.
and then Trump's role again is, I mean, it's almost like have you got this show called Gogglebox in America, where people sit and watch the television and sort of comment on what's going on television, and they become the sort of stars of the show, even though the actual, the show is the other shows. And Trump's almost like the Gogglebox president. He's sort of commenting on these events as if he's not really involved, but like his
Yeah.
his his or he's like his role on a reality TV show. He's sort of calling the shots and being the big guy and being in charge. But in reality, all he's doing is sort of being the front man for a pretty chaotic government that is implementing these grand plans that keep failing him. And
Yeah.
so as a result, you have this weirdly inconsistent and boastful and sometimes obstreperous, angry outbursts about Israel, not doing what he told them to do. And probably because Israel knew what the real plan was, and they just did the real plan rather than the pitch to Trump to make Trump feel that he really was the person cementing all this diplomacy together. So I kind of feel it's in a way you have to think about what exactly is Trump's function within the current American government to some degree. He simply doesn't have the
Intellectual
the
fortitude,
strategic command, if you like.
confidence.
I mean, he's clearly has a great skill at mobilizing and enthusing people and pushing them in certain directions, and I guess making certain ruthless judgments about people. But he's not a person who can say, all right, let's do this tactical approach to diplomacy and military issues and see how it plans out. What he does is saying, oh, I like option A or I like option B. I like the one where I come out as the winner.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I feel that's it's a bit of amateur psychologizing, but I do think it is important to think about that in terms of the leaders' decision-making style, and but it's also the way in which American foreign policy decision-making is happening at the moment. It's clearly, quite divided. It's quite chaotic. There's clearly long-term plans devised by the intelligence agencies largely that are just kind of being rolled out with adjustments to situations and circumstances and the personalities of the key leaders.
Yeah, I suspect they said, "Sir, here's the coloring book. The option on the coloring book," and Trump is like, "Here's your crayons." Like, your opinion of him is much higher than mine. I think he's deeply, deeply incompetent, and I think they probably told him.
Don't get me wrong. I think he's deeply incompetent too, but he's got to where he has because he clearly must have some sort of
He's rich.
bullying, charismatic influence over people. So that's that. So his ability to for people have projected all this. I mean, all the just in the geopolitics channels over the last couple of months, all these people who thought Trump was a revolutionary peace president were just, there was something about his presentation that worked sort of magic over people. So
They were desperate. They were just desperate people who wanted something different.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
But so that he has that ability, but it's not a particularly useful ability to be the president.
You mean the ability to lie? He has the ability to lie shamelessly. Yes, he does. I agree with you on that. He can lie shamelessly. Habitual liars lie. I mean, look, I will give you this. He identified that the American public was sick of these wars. He identified it, and he zeroed in on it like a laser. And having no morals, no ethics, no, purely through political expedience, he went that route. And he would go after neocons. It would say Liz Cheney is a neocon. She's a problem. If she was in a firing line, she wouldn't dare go out there to shoot anybody. Like, he successfully ran a campaign doing that. Agreed. But he didn't mean it, which is the issue, right?
Well, I think what he really meant behind all the stuff was he didn't like endless wars where America lost. So what the problem with the endless wars was America wasn't the winner. Didn't he say at one point America doesn't win anymore or something like that?
Yeah,
and,
he did.
And he doesn't really. I don't mean he presents a strongman image in the sort of authoritarian way, because I think sometimes that is all a little bit exaggerated with him. But he does present this sort of machismo sort of, sort of WrestleMania kind of strongman sort of image, doesn't he?
Yeah, but
And
it's so
so
weak.
I actually think a lot of the, I think he sort of channeled a sort of resentment about the fact that America wasn't winning anymore. So he both attracted the people who really wanted an end to the endless wars, but he
Mhm.
also attracted all the people like Eric Prince and Mike Flynn and all those crap. Steve Bannon, in a way, who just wanted America to go harder and show their and Pete Hegseth show their warrior spirit and sort of really win the wars that they really could win.
Yeah.
So maybe
But he
choosing some
hasn't
different
been
targets.
winning. But he hasn't been winning anything, which
And
is
he
the issue.
hasn't, and that's why I think he's getting more and more unhinged because it's all sort of falling apart.
Yeah.
It's just falling apart for him, really, isn't it? I mean,
It's
I read during the week the Russian, I think he's an economist, Sergei Glaziev, has this theory about a five-stage plan the United States has for kind of world domination. Stage one is to you know, set up the sort of Russophobic regime in Ukraine to be the dagger in the heart of Russia. Step two was separating Russia and the European Union. Step three was the sort of regime change operation in Russia. Step four was Iran to then weaken both China and Russia, and also to enable the sort of greater Israel sort of Middle East project as the sort of expansion of the American empire in the
yeah.
Middle East. And then step five is to go for China. He actually says, to kind of induce a famine there and produce internal instability. And if you listen to Steve Bannon, he kind of basically says that as well. And the thing about that five-stage plan is, well, we know the Russia thing didn't work out. But nonetheless, despite the fact that the Russia step three didn't work out, Trump has gone ahead with step four. Trump, is the symbol for the American government, the American state, and he, clearly wants to go to China at some point. But I just don't know if he's going to be able to. And even if you go back to step one and step two, I mean, step one kind of worked out, but they also ended up with this weird regime that, has lots of Banderites and started having a civil war against its own population, became a bit of an embarrassment, a corrupt embarrassment, and then the whole sort of, Trump Russiagate sort of thing happened, and it became all very complicated. And step two, the Russia European Union split, it took them a long, long time to, in fact, they had to, blow something up in order to really split,
Yeah.
German economic interests and
Yeah.
Russian economic interests. So every step along this sort of grand strategy to dominate the world is still being executed, but it's sort of, they're getting 50% or 70% or 30% through each of their key stages,
Yeah.
but still fighting on. And as they fight on now into Iran, and if they try to fight on with China, and presumably all the tariffs were part of the fight against China, they will find it more and more difficult. And I think Trump is just this showman at the top who's trying to manage his image, while riding these big plans being put in place by the agencies and the
Agreed.
grand strategists. And he's sort of making judgments about people and getting frustrated and, probably realizing to some degree he's sort of in over his head and is just
Agreed.
sort of floundering and floundering and floundering.
No, I agree with you because I think somebody. I was having a conversation with Brian Berletic, and it was like, yeah, Trump doesn't read policy papers. He doesn't
No,
read it all. right? And if he doesn't read policy papers, and yet he's moving in a particular direction, somebody is.
Yeah.
Somebody is feeding him this stuff.
See,
And so,
the one thing I'd say about, I mean, I think Brian's fantastic, and it is remarkable that you find these sort of policy papers in the American government. But I'd only say two things. One, the thing about the American government is, from my point of view, having worked in Australian governments, it's
divided.
very it's sort of quite privatized. Like,
Yeah.
there are all these people who just go in and out of the think tanks and all this sort of stuff, which means that, you've got everyone and their dog expressing a different opinion in some of these think tanks.
Yeah.
And they're, to some degree, a kind of policy rent-a-crowd. Like, someone wants to run some sort of scheme up a flagpole, and let's get the Rand Corporation to write it for us, kind of thing. So there is a sense in which, at least in my experience, skillful bureaucrats will use think tanks as for their purposes as much as the think tanks are exploiting the government. It might
agreed.
be a different balance of power in the US, but I don't know. And then
No,
the
I don't
other thing
disagree with
is it's just this thing of they have the plans, but the plans are sort of falling apart. So it's sort of like
That's
this
the
sort of
catch. And
incoherent,
I mentioned the same thing to
shambolic
Brian.
improvisation.
Yeah, I mentioned the same thing to Brian, that just because you have a plan doesn't mean it works,
Yeah.
especially if you have incompetent leadership who's trying to effectuate that plan. But they clearly seem to be moving in a direction. Like, meaning, regardless of who's running up a flagpole, they are moving in a particular direction. And that is true with Russia, that is true with Iran, that is true with China, meaning they have delineated China, Russia, and Iran as being this kind of fulcrum to the larger multipolar world that they need to stop. And they have, everything that they've been doing, whether it's been unconscious, whether it's been because of a policy document, whatever, they have taken every shot that they could potentially take with them. And so I would agree with you that they do want to pivot to China. They just keep getting bogged down. And there's something else I want to hit you with. So
Yep.
he is being very definitive about this, though. Like, Trump is acting as if this is done. This is done for 10 years. And he lets it slip a little bit where he's like, well, could start back tomorrow, could start back in a week, but it's done. I think it's done. The nuclear facilities are gone. Okay, that's clearly absurd. This war is not over with. Israel is just retooling. They never attended to a ceasefire agreement. And like, as I pointed out from the Jerusalem Post, they were very clear that they were not going to attend to a ceasefire, meaning before they even got to ceasefire, they were talking about violating the ceasefire. What the hell is going on? Like, so how can he not know that? Is it just he's not told?
Well, I mean,
You're in government.
With every minister in government, there's always this challenge of, like, there is so much information that they're nominally responsible for. And if you think about the President of the United States believing that they're running the world, as both Joe Biden and Donald Trump have believed or said they believed, the amount of information and plans and strategies and issues that are actually occurring on a day-to-day basis are absolutely enormous. And for a very highly competent minister, like I interviewed Gareth Evans, the former Australian foreign minister, recently on the channel, and like he would go through, hundreds and hundreds of pages of briefing every day. Donald Trump doesn't do that. So it gets channeled down into some kind of briefing. And by all accounts, Donald Trump, allows JD Vance to brief him on the intelligence briefing. So he's sort of allowing his trusted barons, if you like, to sort of tell him what really matters on things. So it may well be he simply doesn't fully grasp issues. And you do wonder whether there's also just a kind of a cognitive overload to some degree. Like, he's nearly 80. He's it's not really the life he's led to, analyze complex diplomatic situations and all that sort of stuff. So it's a kind of, let's be gracious and say it's a new skill for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, it's difficult to learn such a complicated new skill at 80. And he's doing it under enormous social, psychological pressure, fronting cameras and all that kind of stuff. And he, no doubt, probably also conceives his job more about selling the message, sort of, steering the boat, managing the politics, that sort of thing, rather than getting too bogged down into the detail. So I think there is just, and yet he's so, some people use the term narcissistic, he has such a drive to present himself as being totally on top of the situation, to be the boss, to be the guy who says you're fired, to be the guy who makes the deal. He can't sort of admit to the world that he's just the chairman of the board sort of thing. He's actually doing the whole business. So I suspect there's a mix of those kind of things going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, the war with Iran, I guess, is certainly not over, and I think the broader conflict between the United States and the rising powers of the world is certainly not over.
Especially not Iran, especially not now. I mean, they have to be aware that they're vulnerable. I mean, look, from my point of view, if not won, they didn't lose, which is saying something. But whatever weaknesses Israel had, or let's say mispredictions, they will try to fix those when they do this again, and Iran has to know that. So we'll see. It's just fascinating to me that he's making these grand proclamations when that seems to be obvious. And I can't think to him. I was like, okay, well, is it just that in his mind, I don't want to be involved? I just don't want to be involved. I don't want to get involved in the larger Middle Eastern war. And so he makes these proclamations as if I'm trying to force reality into existence, when everybody around him knows that that's not the case. I guarantee you, in Tehran and Tel Aviv, and these governments, they're thinking to themselves, all right, we need to prepare for the war.
You see, and I think he hasn't really been in charge of the diplomacy, or I don't think really America's actually been in charge of the diplomacy over for all the noise that Trump has made. But when you think about it, over the last 1 week or 2 weeks, we've had total surrender, total ceasefire, bomb the hell out of you. There's more bombs coming. I mean, who knows?
Kill the Ayatollah.
What did you drink this morning? But I think last time I was on, I think I'd mentioned that there was a press report that had just come through that had said Putin and Xi had spoken, and it was some weird thing about, communications and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And yesterday I checked the Chinese foreign ministry, and they had the full readout of the Xi-Putin call from that day. Yeah.
Interesting.
And it was basically 4 points, which I think, which were essentially the 4 points that were put by Russia, China, and Pakistan in the Security Council resolution on Monday. I think that was when that debate was happening. And the number one thing was an immediate ceasefire, civilian protection, and then I think some issues around nuclear stuff and something else. I can't quite remember what it was. So I suspect there's actually been an awful lot of unpublicised diplomacy from China, Russia, and potentially others over the last week or two that have helped create the conditions for this ceasefire. And Trump has been the sort of, the wood in the ocean bobbing away on the waves, while the broader diplomatic forces are potentially put in place. It's just it's just speculation on my part, and there's clearly also, I guess, perhaps some sort of coordination between the militaries as well. But it's a quite surprising turn of events, really, isn't it? I'm like, we were sort of, everyone was worried about a catastrophic scenario, and then all of a sudden, there's this sort of, is that all there is to this war?
So, yes and no. I mean,
Yeah,
for one, I didn't think Iran was as weak as
yeah,
people, that's many people thought they were. I thought
mm,
to myself, I was like, just because they don't want to fight doesn't mean that they can't fight. Like, just because they keep saying, back off, leave us alone. I get it. Sociopaths think that if you're not willing to kill somebody, then you're immediately weak, right? But they were like, they kept saying, back off, leave us alone, leave us sacrifices. They just weren't interested in the war. And what rational, sane human being that doesn't want their country's bombed would
yeah,
be?
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
so I get where they're coming from with this. I guess my audience has been screaming at me because I've been a bit of angst has been pushing me to be more critical of Iran on
Mm,
this.
mm,
Appeasement hasn't worked.
mm,
And it's almost like every step towards appeasement has only brought about the thing that you didn't want, which is war. Whether that was with Minsk and Russia, where Russia is like, they're doing agreements, and the West doesn't believe in them at all, don't care. They say, yeah, we lied, you gave us time to build up a military. Or with us, where every step of the way, they would do True Promise 1, and it would be theatrical, purely theatrical. True Promise 2, and they'd stop. Israel would hit them, and they just wouldn't respond. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? Like the thing that you're communicating to them is that you're incapable of responding. And I get people make the argument with Israel's nukes. If that's the case, then you should sign whatever document Trump gives you, because that's always going to be true. And so it's like, there's a question of whether or not they should have kept going with the ceasefire. I strongly believe, though, that the reason they stopped wasn't entirely because they wanted to stop. It was because Donald Trump attacked those bases, which is kind of a threat.
yeah,
Meaning, in the same way that True Promise 2 was a threat, that, look,
yeah,
we will escalate. If you keep messing with us, if you back us into a corner, we will respond.
yeah,
I think that's what Trump was doing in his theatrics.
yeah,
Stop. Our
yeah,
client is getting damaged. This
yeah,
is, this goes beyond the damage that we want to take place with our client.
yeah.
What back channel negotiations do you think were taking place? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, when Putin did his sort of press conference at SPIEF, at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, he said that he felt, negotiations hadn't been exhausted and there were potential solutions to the sort of Iranian issue and the nuclear issue.
Right.
So, I saw a report just the other day, or just earlier this evening, I mean, that Stephen Witkoff had said that some sort of sanctions on Iran had been lifted, like the day
From China.
after the
Yeah.
ceasefire
Well, I
around,
can show you that clip if you
China
want to see
oil.
it, by the way. Donald Trump said it also, saying the sanctions on Iranian oil.
Yeah,
In fact, I have the clip if you want to see it.
yeah,
It says, let's see, didn't move material, reverse negotiations,
yeah.
oil
And
from Iran.
obviously, why are you doing that? I mean, like, Morandi, etc., were talking about blowing up the oil fields and all that kind of stuff. It would not have been in anyone's interest for that to happen. And it's that thing of, um, you know, if you bring chaos into the world, is it really going to work out for you, kind of thing. But anyhow, yeah, let's listen to this.
Yeah, you're stuck with the chaos at that point. Yeah, I don't think any of them wanted the chaos. I don't think the U.S. wanted a larger war. I don't think the U.S. wanted their ships going down. I don't think Iran wanted to be hit with, bomber after bomber.
Restarting negotiations with Iran? And if so, have they reciprocated?
So
Or is
our
this
people,
sort of a settled
Marco could answer this, but our people are.
Oh, wait. That's not right. It's this one.
Today you said China can now continue to purchase oil from Iran.
Yeah.
Are you giving up on your maximum pressure campaign? Because
With
there's
who?
sanctions right now
With who?
on Iran.
No, look, they just had a war. The war was fought. They fought it bravely. I'm not giving up. They're in the oil business. I mean, I could stop it if I wanted. I could sell China the oil myself. I don't want to do that. They're going to need money to put that country back into shape. We want to see that happen. Would it? No. If they're going to sell oil, they're going to sell oil. We're not taking over the oil. We could have, I used to.
I'm not going to go into him bringing into something nonsense. Oh, we could have just stolen oil if we wanted to steal the oil. I mean, we had power to do that. I mean, God, man,
But you see, that's the classic case of Trump masking a back down in his sort of bravado talk, really, isn't it? And
it's so petty.
It's a skill that works for certain situations, but it's certainly a skill that's worked for him in that particular occasion. But
it looks horrible like this.
Yeah,
I mean, it looks so petty. It's so narcissistic. And by the way, it's not true. From my I understand what he's doing here. It's almost like a Backchannel deal is being made where, okay, we're going to bomb your oil fields or we're going to bomb the facilities, but we're going to give you this carrot with the oil. But correct me if I'm wrong, though. China was already buying oil from Iran. They were buying like 15% of the oil they were getting from Iran.
Right.
Yeah. So
I think that's right.
So what does that matter?
Yeah. Don't know. But yeah, I feel there are probably things that have happened there, but it's also maybe just, I mean, by all accounts, Israel was clearly very worried about the damage. It's clearly had a big impact on morale. I've heard from a range of people privately referring to, many Israelis leaving Israel, moving to Europe and all that sort of stuff. So the strains on Israelis, Netanyahu's son was beaten up and all this sort of thing. So the strains within Israel must be great. One wonders whether, I wonder whether the regime change will end up happening in Israel before it happens in Iran. But
That's a good.
Who knows? One doesn't really want to wish too many regime changes on anyone.
I want to get to NATO for a bit. I got to get to NATO before I let you go because your video again, the Burning Archive is a fantastic channel. I don't say that often. I don't give. Just not entirely true. I guess I do give people channels compliments. I mean it in this case. I actually really mean it. So this is. Where is it? Mark Rutt. And I keep thinking to myself, how are they not humiliated by this? Like this behavior. Rutt calling Trump daddy. And they brought it up to Trump, and Trump was like, oh, he said it in a very loving way or something like that. It's a grown man calling another grown man daddy. And I want to get your take on this in the context of the myths of NATO, in the context of the US, because we're told where Europe wants us, we're protecting Europe, we're defending Europe. Europe needs us there to defend Europe. This is what we were effectively told about NATO. That's why Trump can go and say, well, we want 5%. As if we're doing you a favor. When you make this kind of argument of it's the other way around. And there was another woman, I think it was it either Italy? I think it was Italy, where they made a very similar argument that NATO's time has come, that this is used as an American power projection device, as opposed to something that's defending Europe. It's making us less safe, not more safe. It is time for it to go. And yet Trump is standing there, we need 5%. We need 5%. I'm fascinated by that, and I want to get your take on that. But let me go to the daddy comment, because I find the daddy comment to just be atrocious.
I didn't call him daddy. What I said is that sometimes in Europe, I hear sometimes countries saying, hey, Mark, will the US stay with us? And I said, that sounds a little bit like a small child asking his daddy, hey, are you still staying with the family? So in that sense, I use daddy, not that I was calling President Trump daddy.
If I remember correctly, he said something like "Daddy, don't leave us" or something to that effect. I could correct me if I'm wrong. I thought he said like "Daddy, don't leave us" or something.
And look, to be fair, within American, geopolitical, like Chas Freeman, quite a lot of those sort of people still have this, let's call it a trope, that Europe would just fight amongst themselves if America wasn't there, being the big daddy who would protect things. So, and then the whole, J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth thing of you guys, which has been a theme really articulated by the Kagans and lots of American commentators that, Europe's this sort of welfare dependent, lazy, effete sort of crowd of bureaucrats who, aren't prepared to sort of get out on the rifle range and do manly tasks to defend themselves, and they're totally dependent on the USA. And I guess my argument is the actual history of NATO is that when it was initially formed, it's actually a partnership between a sort of newly born sort of empire, the American empire after 1945, and some European empires in decline, the British Empire, the Dutch, the Belgian, the French, and America was fearful of the Soviet Union in the late 1940s, unreasonably fearful because there's really no evidence that the Soviet Union was on the rampage to attack Western Europe. They just lost a seventh of their people, a huge amount of their economic infrastructure. They were absolutely on their knees. They certainly were controlling parts of Eastern Europe as a buffer against Germany and didn't want Germany remilitarized, but they weren't planning to invade Europe. It was, as much as anything, the sort of anti-communist crusade of America. And so, but America couldn't do it on its own, so it needed to get the European empires to support it. And in making that partnership, it's important to realize that this wasn't just a security arrangement in Europe, because the British Empire had, territories in or dominions or, members of the Commonwealth like Australia in Australia and Asia and Africa. It, lost India in 1947, but it still had lots of places around the world. The same with the French. The French still have a colony in the Pacific, New Caledonia, and of course, have really only sort of recently lost some of their sort of kind of neo-colonial colonies in Africa. So it's a partnership of empires. And I think what develops over time is there's actually a lot of tension between Europe and the United States over how much gets spent, but also on what the priorities should be as well. And, whether Europe actually wants to sort of repair relationships with its traditional other half of Eastern Europe rather than just be totally dependent on the United States. And over time, I think America actually becomes dependent on Europe as a sort of offensive forward base. It has astonishing amounts of soldiers still in Europe. It has the military bases. It couldn't do a lot of the things it's done in the Middle East without some of that forward base projection. The big German base, Ramstein or whatever, apparently has been crucial to a lot of the operations in the endless Middle East wars, and presumably even today. It's in Australia, the Pine Gap base, which is based in Central Australia, but Australia has no operational control over, totally run by the US as part of its overseas empire, has reportedly, no one really knows and no one's really told, had a significant role in some of the missions over Iran and Yemen and Israel, Palestine, and even perhaps into Russia. So, it's like this huge, big sort of satellite sort of surveillance sort of base. So I think actually rather than NATO being dependent on America, or Europe being dependent on America, America's dependent on Europe as its offensive partner. And in doing so, it's totally distorted Europe's sort of defense priorities and security priorities. If Europe sort of had a balanced approach to actually defense rather than projecting global American power. And there's another interview with Rutte where he actually says the purpose of NATO is to project global American power. And it's a totally accurate statement that he's made, and it's been accurate since 1949. That has been the purpose of NATO, to project global American power. But if Europe actually found a way to have better diplomatic relations with Russia and North Africa, presumably as well, and a genuine defensive policy that was actually protecting itself against real attacks rather than launching regime change operations and MI6 operations and all the rest of it, then I think European security would be a lot better off. And then with this NATO summit, the big decisions that they've made, it's interesting because the headline is 5% more spending, and right. I think there is a little bit of potentially some good news sort of hidden behind all that. It might be a bit of a sort of a fighting retreat almost, because the 5% is composed of 3%, I think, or 3.5% on core military spending, and the rest on what's called, infrastructure spending, that sort of stuff. And this is basically the arrangement that was struck in Germany a couple of months ago, where they increased their debt ceiling. And that 1.5%, a lot of that would be on things like railways and bridges and hospitals and a lot of public investment things that, the Russian threat may be a good, rationale to get done, as opposed to them being totally geared to a sort of a military purpose, if you like. I think there's been quite a lot of talk by people like Adam Tooze, etc., that some of the stuff that will be bundled into that infrastructure investment will be, if you like, more civilian than military, really.
Yeah. I am. First, I agree with your first part that it is, and it's funny. I always say it. I said NATO is a power projection device for the United States and Europe, because that's what it seems to be. It seems like anytime it comes up with France, would say, Macron would come out with a black eye after getting beat by his wife, and say, "Hey, we need the European military." And what they would scuttle is like, "Oh, no, we're not for that. We're not for that." And of course, the U.S. is never for that, which is why it was always weird that Donald Trump, or people kept saying Donald Trump wants to pull out of NATO. It's like, well, that's strange, because NATO is America's projection of power into Europe, into the rest of the world. So it would be weird if he did that. So I agree with you on that front. On the other front, I think what Donald Trump, though, is doing more than anything else is he's assuming that Europe will remain under the U.S. thumb, whether the U.S. is there or not. Mm-hmm. And so if we can get you to pay 5%, you're most likely going to buy the weapons from us. You're going to buy your bombs, missiles, your tanks, all this Patriots. You're going to buy all this stuff from us. We spent so much of it in Ukraine that you need to replenish your own stocks. You buy it from us. So I think in his mind that this is a great way for America to sell weapons into Europe, because they're not going to buy them from Russia. They're not going to buy them from China. You're going to buy them from us. Now, if it's dual use, fair enough. That could be something that they can sell to the public. But correct me if I'm wrong. They haven't even been hitting the 2%. Let alone 5%.
No, that's right. That's right. And I mean, some are doing better than others. But see, if I were a crafty European bureaucrat faced with this situation, I would say to America, "Oh, of course we're going to spend 5%. We're going to lift the spending to 5%. 5%, and we're sorry, America, that we haven't. We're sort of kind of as Rutte has done, a little bit." Crudely, let's say, really lay on the flattery and get Donald Trump off our back. Because, as you say, I don't think Trump really wants to withdraw from Europe. He just wants Europe. He's just a debt collector. He's just saying, pay up. We want more.
I'm sorry to interrupt. That has been modus operandi. Like the entire That is the part, honestly, that's the part that shocked me about the whole Ukraine war. So if you think about it, you mentioned it yourself. They broke the vestiges of the links between Europe and Russia by destroying Nord Stream pipeline. So there's that. The oil and gas that Europe was getting, because Europe was this garden, as they called it. Well, that garden turned to weeds pretty quickly when it wasn't getting Russian oil. They couldn't give it from a good price. And so you get this kind of weird situation where the US is selling LNG to Europe 5 times more than what they were paying for prior. Europe is buying Russian gas, but they're buying it through, let's say, Saudi Arabia, India, for an upcharge. So they're spending more for pretty much the same product, and is getting it from the same place. On top of the US convincing Europe to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on weapons that they're buying from America. So America, in this entire process, was able to effectively suck out resources from Europe, bringing over companies, bringing over businesses, bringing over money in the context of oil and gas, bringing over money in the context of weapons. And they kept doing it. And this goes to your point about, is this really in Europe's best interest? Or is it in America's best interest? I know Trump is making the argument, we're saving your ass. You should thank us. Like, if it wasn't for us, you'd die sniveling, fighting each other. When really the reality is a little bit different, right? Where it's like, if we told you to kick rocks, we could come up with something of our own. We don't entirely need you. And we wouldn't be spending all of this money into these wars. Maybe we'd have a different relationship with Russia. Yeah. It's not the way it's being projected. And yet the Europe accepts the argument.
Yeah. And I think part of the problem for Europe is, NATO, they've effectively outsourced their defence and foreign policy to NATO rather than to their political union, the European Union, which means there's this struggle within the political decision makers of Europe around, are they loyal to the American defence and foreign policy, or are they loyal to whatever European domestic, social and potential foreign policies they could pursue? And there's clearly a body of opinion emerging in Europe. Spain is an example, which is saying, enough with this crap, let's look after Europe, and, even contemplating leaving NATO. Certainly Spain has objected to increasing the 5% spending target. But if I were the crafty European bureaucrat, I would say, okay, we'll agree to the 5% target, okay, but there's a 10-year time horizon on it, which is well past Donald Trump's tenure in office. And and look, we're not entirely sure how much progress we'll make over the next 2 years, but we'll do our best. And we'll break the 5% target into 2 bits. One is the arms stuff and one is the infrastructure stuff. And look, Europe really needs better public investment right now because we've neglected it for too long. Our railways are run down and all this sort of stuff. So look, we're going to prioritise the spending on the investment stuff first, because that also takes a long time to build, blah, 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 blah. We'll definitely get to the arms stuff. Absolutely promise you, Donald, we'll get to the arms stuff. And then I've also noted that they've also talked about, free trade discussions and all this sort of stuff, defence procurement policies and that kind of stuff. And so, look, we just want to make sure that we do our part in terms of improving Europe's capacity to contribute to defence production over time. And that means we have to develop our defence industry. So, look, we do want to spend the majority of this additional 3% money on arms on the European defence industries, Donald, or whoever your successor might be. And so it is possible that things might, over time, sort of work out better, assuming that there are crafty bureaucrats with a long-term vision still somewhere in Europe. But I'm pretty sure there will be some, even though they're probably getting crowded out by a lot of very sort of pro-Atlanticist voices at the moment. So I think that might be one way. And then just one other thing. I did notice Alexander Stubb, who's the Finnish president and a very strong Atlanticist guy. He said the 3 big outcomes of the NATO summit were that the 5% target, he said NATO is returning to its core mission, which is anti-Russia. He said, like back in 1949. Now, that's bad, I think, that there's this anti-Russia obsession. But from my part of the world, here in the Indo-Pacific, it's also good because the last couple of NATO summits have made a big deal about how NATO is going to expand into the Indo-Pacific and all that sort of stuff. And that rhetoric seems to have been dialed down. You know, the Japanese leader, the South Korean leader, the Australian leader all did not attend NATO this summit. So there may be a little bit of a let's back off the expand into the Indo-Pacific anti-China conflict. And then the third part that Stubbs said was NATO is becoming a new NATO that will be more European, which might just be, you know, the very early signs of the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Within a kind of course we'll do what you say, Donald, and of course we'll take our defence more seriously. There might be a bit of an effort to, over time, actually develop a genuine European defence strategy, because having a spending target is utterly pointless. I mean, if you think about any business or government agency, the amount you spend is not as important as the goal that you're seeking to achieve with whatever spending you have. And it's probably better if NATO spends 1.5% on defence and maybe 2% on diplomacy, and actually direct it into correct purposes rather than just, you know, pursue American arms.
Jeff, who would buy our weapons?
Stuff.
Who would buy our weapons? You're trying to hurt American business, Jeff.
Oh, well.
You're trying to hurt our
They
business.
haven't performed terribly well in recent years, have they?
Yeah, you're trying to hurt our economy, man. What are you doing? What are you doing? Jeff, man, I always appreciate these conversations. That's where I do. Jeff Rich. Jeff Rich is author, historian. Dr. Jeff Rich, author, historian, podcaster who worked for. There's something someone wanted me to ask you. There's something somebody wanted me to. One of my subs, one of the people who watch this channel, they asked whether or not Australia was backing off of China or something. AUKUS. It was something about AUKUS.
Yeah. So, there has been a big debate about AUKUS. AUKUS is the security arrangement between Australia, Britain. I always say Britain, not
NATO.
The United Kingdom, and the USA. And it basically involved nuclear submarines that Australia would get in like 30 years. And there's been a big debate. In fact, in America, under Elbridge Colby, there's a review of the AUKUS arrangement at the moment, which will probably mean that the commitments to Australia won't really be fulfilled, but the United States will end up being able to birth its sort of nuclear submarines in Australian ports. So I don't think Australia will back off AUKUS or pursue a more independent foreign policy. I think Australia will be like the loyal first lieutenant who, you know, or first mate who wants to go down with the captain of the ship of the American Empire, I think, unfortunately.
But correct me if I'm wrong, though. And I never quite understood it. Australia's largest trading partner is China.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, AUKUS is effectively aimed at China.
Yep.
How does that work?
There was a great comedy show in Australia a couple of years ago, I think called Utopia, which, you know, it basically featured someone asking, or the Defence Department officials asking that question. So you mean China, who's our major trading partner, is going to protect us from doing trade with China? Is that what you mean?
It makes no sense. Like, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense. But it really, I mean, there is a very influential group of the sort of defence security establishment, parts of the business world who are very tied into the sort of American security world, who get a lot of prestige and presumably wealth also from serving America well. Like I've heard some of the Australian bureaucrats who've been responsible for cybersecurity and all that sort of stuff boast about how wonderful it is that we're part of Five Eyes and we're one of the best cyber warfare outfits in the world and all this sort of crap.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people who do have a lot of interests in this pretty aggressive positioning of Australia, and there are some people who have a very ideological predisposition who just hate communist China and all that sort of stuff, like there are in America.
And
so there are they're the ones who sort of lock us into this policy, even though general public opinion, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, I thought China was our friends because."
It's like, why are we doing this?
I've got a lot of Australian Chinese friends, it's sort of like, what's the point of this? So it's really quite tragic, and but unfortunately, Australia is just really at this point not effectively, I would say, a sovereign country, really. I mean, we basically do what the US wants us to do, at least in foreign policy and security matters, at least. Not so much the domestic policy stuff. Yeah.
You and Europe also. So does Europe. You'd be surprised. You won't be surprised, but so does Europe. Jeff Rich. Jeff Rich is author, historian, podcaster, who's worked in government for 33 years. He's retired currently in Melbourne, Australia. Jeff has a lifetime of studying history and how knowledge of history, historical currents can help give context to a changing, for some reason I want to say geopolitical structure, but for a changing world. You can find Jeff on YouTube at The Burning Archive, and you can find him on Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. As I keep saying this, Jeff, you have a fantastic channel. I learned a lot from it. I really enjoy it, man. You be safe, okay?
Thank you. You too.
All
Thanks, Jamal.
right. Thank you. Bye-bye.